where people have noticed that it's a positive correlation, that an increase in consumption of ice cream is correlated with an increase in murder rates. But to try and make a causal claim that people are killing people more often because more ice cream is being consumed, that just doesn't make any sense. The issue there, and this isn't always the case with spurious correlations, but in this particular example, the ice cream murder rates one, in that case what's going on is that there's a third variable that's causing the changes in the ice cream consumption and in the murder rates, and that third variable is temperature. That as temperatures go up, people eat more ice cream, like in the summer, and then as temperatures go up, also murder rates go up. Whether it's for because tempers are shorter, or people are just outside more when it's hotter, so there's more opportunities to kill people, that kind of a thing. Anyways, you can check out these examples if you want, but the important thing is that you just understand what a spurious correlation is. Okay, moving on. All right, reliability and validity are two concepts in research that are they're just well, I'll just explain what they are. So, all right, reliability. This is probably the driest slide of the PowerPoint, which is why I'm trying to think of how to make it more interesting. And actually, there is kind of this link here is pretty interesting, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But this has to do with reliability. So, what is reliability? The reliability of a research study refers to how likely the research results are to be replicated if a study is reproduced. Here's the thing about science in the world, or at least let's say in the US. Ideally, here's the way science operates, that some researcher does some research on something and then finds some result and then gets that result published in some sort of journal. And then other people are like, that's interesting. Wow, does this independent variable really cause a change in that dependent variable? And then ideally, other researchers will be like, oh, okay, you know what? I question whether or not these results are reliable. I think that if I did this study, I might not find the same results. I think it was just kind of a fluke that this one person found these results. And so I want to see if there's real reliability here. Because you don't necessarily want to base, I don't know, the government, say, for example, doesn't want to base some significant policy decision on one study that one scientist did. Even if the scientist was doing his or her best job, there could be, for any number of reasons, there could be some factors that might have led to a misleading, unreliable result. So in an ideal world, in an ideal scientific world, people reproduce or replicate is what it's sometimes called. One scientist sees a result and then tries to replicate the study to see if they get the same result. This link here, as the title suggests, social science has a complicated, infinitely tricky replication crisis. You can check that out if you want. It is an interesting article. What's happened, this started in psychology, where some psychologists started wondering, like, how many of the research results that have been accepted as fact can actually be replicated, or are we just accepting things as fact that have been asserted just based on one research study? So they started trying to replicate some of the more famous, well-known and influential findings in psychology, and they found it was a pretty sorry, I wasn't actually sure if these links would work. So right, this is from 2018. I wanted to get the actual percentage. Right. Here we go. So the Center for Open Sciences, they tried to replicate 100 psychology findings, but only around a third. They were only able to replicate about a third of them. So this was, as my PowerPoint slide suggested, this is a crisis, and this is not just limited to psychology. People now are starting to ask a lot of questions like, how many things are we accepting as fact just based on one research study? And so this is a problem. Okay, so that is all just to talk about this concept of reliability. How likely are your research results to be replicated if your study was reproduced? And if it's not very likely, then you don't have a very reliable study. All right, so validity. Validity is a different concept. Validity, as I've written here, refers to how well a study measures what it was designed to measure. So validity comes up as an issue if you want to study a variable that is not easily measured. So for example, in recent years, well, sociologists have been interested in the concept of trust for a long time, but in more recent years, economists have started to be interested in that concept as well. So you have this this concept of trust, but how do you measure the level of trust that exists between people? Because it's a pretty subjective thing. If you just ask a bunch of your friends, like, okay, how much do you trust me? They might say, various things. They might all say, well, I trust you, but you don't know what trust means to them. They might all be thinking of a different thing in terms of trust. So you can't just rely on, say, people's word, or just assuming that we all share the same definition of trust, or love is another similar kind of variable there. How do you measure that? So let's use the love example. How do you measure? Let's say you want to make an argument that I don't know whether love would be the independent variable or the dependent variable. Let's say you want to make an argument that changes in some independent variable cause changes in the level of love that people feel towards their significant other. You can't just ask all these people, how much do you love your significant other? Because, I don't know, people might all just say, oh, I love them, as much as possible. There's no end to my love. So you have to think of some way to measure love that isn't just relying on somebody's word. So you might say, all right, okay, how often, as an indicator of how much you love someone, we're gonna ask, how often do you tell this person that you love them in the course of a day? And so then, well, okay, if you go that route, then you're going to be assuming that, okay, people who say I love you more often love their partners more than other people who rarely, if ever, say it. But someone might question the validity of that assumption. They may be like, well, just saying, measuring how often people say they love their partner is not really actually measuring how much they actually love them. So that's what validity is all about. It can be tricky, if you don't want to measure easily measurable, or if you don't want to study things that are easily measured, like years of education or income, you might end up grappling with questions of validity. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the first research method that I'm going to talk about in this PowerPoint presentation. There are 3 total methods that I'll talk about, and what I'll do is describe each method and then give you the strengths and weaknesses of each method, because there is no perfect research